on the show, the last show, me and Will were talking about how we really didn't think anybody expected to, for Kabul to fall so fast. And then right after we got done recording, I listened to you talking to Danny Davis, where both of you guys said, well, yeah, it is possible for the Taliban to walk right into Kabul. And so it seems like, at least you guys had the foresight to speculate that it was a possibility for this thing to fall apart. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, we had the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying, and this is going to come back on him unbelievably, that Kabul won't fall from a Friday to a Monday. But that's what happened. So I guess how, what factors did you see in Afghanistan that made you think it was at least possible to have, unfold the past couple of weeks, which have unfolded, which is the entire country fell to the Taliban?
Yeah. Well, in fact, on page 209 of the book Fool's Errand, I say the same thing. It's very likely that they could take over Kabul in relatively short order as soon as America leaves. The Kabul government cannot stand without our support. And, I probably wrote that a year or two before that. It took me forever to get that book done. But anyway, yeah. I mean, what can you say? The first thing is that the Kabul government was simply fiction put on by the West. It could never stand on its own. And the country of Afghanistan never had the GDP to support that government or its military whatsoever. The entire thing was kind of foisted on them. And then for many different reasons, the Afghan National Army has always essentially been, a put up job that also, was paper thin and would fall without American support at a moment's notice, which is what's happened. And so, there's just no popular support. Never mind the money. There's the government in the North never had popular sovereignty as representing the will of the people. These were the people who were put together by the Americans. And, back in history in 1994 through 1996, the way the Taliban took over the country was mostly by walking right in, telling the local warlords essentially, join us or die, and then, but you can join us if you want. And so they would join, and they pretty much took the whole country that way, or almost all of it, including Kabul. And in 1996, they just walked right into Kabul. And so, this is something that, from the anti-war perspective, is something that we've been grappling with for a very long time. It's 20 years into this war. This is something we've been talking about for years and years and years, for more than a decade, is what's it going to look like when America finally leaves? And the answer is the government will fall and the Taliban sooner or later will take back over the country. And that's been clear at least the last 10 years. And frankly, if they had left instead of doing the Obama surge, the Taliban was a major force in the country at that time, but relative in its power compared to the factions that America had installed in the north of the country, it was much weaker. And, if there was a way that they were going to have a negotiated peace where the American-backed sides don't just completely lose, then it would have been to do it back then. Instead, they waited and waited and waited. They refused to negotiate with the Taliban without including the Kabul government in the negotiations, which, of course, is a deal killer because they don't want a deal. They want the Americans to stay and protect them, right? And so, for years, Bush and Obama, they just refused to make a deal. And so then essentially they stayed long enough. They propped up the government long enough, but without real support. I mean, most of all American combat operations have ceased since about 2014. They've been backing the Afghan National Army on its missions, which are, quite limited. And so while they've backed the Kabul government there, they haven't really helped establish it in power in any firmer way than it was before. And in fact, they've sat and slowly watched the Taliban creepingly take over the entire country. And as I say in the book, and which again was 4 years ago, and I was basing this on reporting from the Wall Street Journal and others, and from the Special Inspector General, John Sopko, that the Taliban ruled half the country in the daytime and about 65% of it at night. And there was this lady named Ashley Jackson who wrote a thing I can't remember now. I think this came out after my book. Because I'm pretty sure I didn't include it in my book. But it was about how after the Americans killed the previous Mullah Mansoor, in a drone strike, that the new guy, Hakanzada, was a much more diplomatic type of guy, or at least a more clever strategist. And that he decided that rather than, and I hope I'm putting this right, I don't think she was saying Mansoor decided this. I think she was saying this was decided after Mansoor by Hakanzada. I could be wrong about that. Maybe it was after Mullah Omar died. But either way, in our current era, the Taliban strategy has been not to just wage total war against everything that the Americans have built, but instead to take it over. And so if the Americans build a school, don't blow it up. Just you decide who gets to be the principal of the school and who gets to be teachers there. And if there's the Americans build a new police station and an armory, that's fine. Just make sure that your guy becomes the police chief. And if they set up this, the Western style of governorship under Kabul's authority, fine. Just make sure you control the guy that's the governor. Instead of just assassinating him, take his chair under the American system and just usurp as much of the they already have kind of their shadow government in the background. Go ahead and usurp the government that the Americans have installed over them as well. And Jackson also talks in there about how they were inviting Tajiks and Uzbeks and even Hazaras, who are Shiites, into their Islamic emirate. They don't call themselves the Taliban. They're the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan to them,
Right.
And so that doesn't say no Shiites allowed necessarily, although I don't know what's going to happen with the Hazaras. That's a whole other question. But at least they have been clever enough, dealing from essentially a position of weakness in their own country, to build up to a position of strength through compromise and through subtlety, and not just trying to be a sledgehammer against everyone. And so then, leading up to now the peace deal, where we have had a ceasefire with them since 2018, and they've been chipping away at the Afghan army even harder than before because the Americans aren't there to help them as much, although there's still some air support, and this has been some air support in this kind of thing. Essentially, by the time it was ready for the withdrawal, I don't know what the signal was. Was it when they gave up Kandahar airfield? And then that was when somebody pulled the starting gun and said, all right, everybody go outside and take over your local town and military base. And they just had their guys spread. The shadow government of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan came out in the daytime and said, this is ours now. And, what they had not done before. They've been, they flipped the light switch and went from insurgency to new state. And they were ready to go. And I was just talking about, Eric Margulies was saying, it's, he was praising my French. It's a coup de Maine, not a coup d'etat, but a coup de Maine, which is a massive surprise attack that wins all at once. And so I think it's somewhat implied in there with relatively light casualties, but maybe not. But so that's what happened. And, Kyle, for all the complaining that this is just an absolute catastrophe, well, it is for the people that America's propped up in power. It is for the reputations of the Americans who have made it this way. And yet, as far as the Taliban taking over the country, you notice that they're kind of acting as though the Taliban have been behaving like ISIS and just going around, machine gunning people and, committing these massive atrocities as they take over the country, the way ISIS did in Western Iraq in 2014. But it doesn't look like that, not yet. I mean, they are brutal and ruthless, and so who knows exactly what they're going to do. Maybe the show trials will begin in a few weeks or something. But so far, they seem to have made a public relations decision, at least, to play it cool and essentially try to maintain the peace and try to build a reputation of, see, we're not so bad for the people of Kabul and for the international community and everyone else, that despite what you heard about us, we're actually going to try to get along with you and you, if not you, right? I don't know.
Right.
So, now, again, I'm not saying like this is a great, a mark of the quality of their character in any wonderful and positive way, but, there's a difference between ruthless and stupid. And it could be that they're making the very rational decision for example, they have stuck by the ceasefire agreement with the Americans and allowed everybody safe passage out of the country from the embassy to the airport. And, I was talking with an Army guy about how, they're really worried this is going to be like Black Hawk Down. All our guys are going to be getting machine gunned and mortared, and they're going to have to send in, special operations guys or air power to blast the living hell out of everything around and all this. None of that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And for that matter, it's not even clear at this point that the panic of the civilians at the airport is even justified. Unless the Taliban issue okay, nobody else is allowed to leave anymore order, but they don't seem to be doing that. They seem